Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Michelle Valadares, and I direct the MFA program in creative writing at the City College of New York. Thank you for joining us to launch Archives as Muse, a Harlem storytelling project. This is an initiative that recognizes, celebrates, and strengthens the MFA program's connection with Harlem and also the role that archives play in the lives of writers, artists, and creatives. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that, but before I say talk about the program, I'd like to introduce two very important guests tonight who will make brief remarks. Both of these guests were indispensable in helping us launch this initiative. The first is our City College of New York president, Vince Boudreau, who has been a great supporter of the MFA program. When we approached the president with our ideas, we were very lucky that he encouraged us to realize this dream. He opened doors so that we could meet potential funders, and here we are today. The second speaker after President Boudreau we will hear from is Sean Buffington, who is the vice president of the Henry Luce Foundation. The Luce Foundation is the funder of this project, and we're extremely grateful for their support. When the pandemic hit and we realized that we had to move everything into a virtual experience, Sean was sympathetic and supportive. So, President Boudreau.
There we go. Michelle, thank you so much for that introduction, and thank you for your visionary leadership of this program. You know, what we do at City College is bring, you know, we use this phrase all the time, the whole people. Our mission is to educate the whole people, and what that means for a creative writing program is that we have a responsibility to help the whole people tell their stories. And so there is a way in which when you look at the work that comes out of the MFA program, it has a distinctive voice and a distinctive social and cultural address, and Michelle has understood that and shepherded it forward from the moment she took over this program. It is truly one of the jewel box programs in this college, and I've been so grateful for your leadership of it. Also tremendously grateful to Sean for bringing the Luce Foundation into interaction with this program. Sean and I met soon after I became president, and he sort of came into my office and said, you know, we're interested in supporting humanities and arts, and indeed he has been. And so the MFA program was the very first thing that I showed him, and true to his word, he has been an ardent supporter of this work, and we're so grateful to that, and so eager to be able to trace the connection between those initial conversations and a project like this coming to fruition. Let me just say something very briefly about this project, and then I'll get out of the way, because they've got a fantastic program set up for today. One of the great joys of moving into the presidency for me has been an emerging, has been able to be one half of an emerging strengthening and the embrace between our college and Harlem, and particularly meeting and getting to know some of the social and cultural institutions that are, in many cases, just a few blocks away from the campus, and understanding that however embedded we have felt as an institution in this community, the community has been longing for us to be fuller participants in the cultural life of Harlem, and to watch those relationships unfold as we've gotten to know each other a little bit better. Not to say that it started, you know, we have a long history of being in this community and of this community, but watching programs like this take advantage of some of these newly reinvigorated relationships has been tremendously joyful. When I talk to some of my friends in Harlem, they talk about you know, this phrase, these hidden figures. They talk about the hidden figures of Harlem, the people who were so instrumental in, in music, in art, in literature, who may still be living or who are curating as a private avocation some archive of historical, cultural significance. It's remarkable. This is a neighborhood where you can literally walk out of the campus in any direction, and with the right guide, see who lived there, what happened on this street corner, what was written or performed or composed in one or another place. And so to see this archive that will allow us to curate those stories come to fruition is tremendous. More importantly, to see the archive as a pathway that will be traveled between the community and the college, and anyone who wants to understand Harlem more and appreciate the college's role in preserving this precious legacy. This archive is going to do that. So Michelle and everyone involved in this project, congratulations on coming to this day. Sean, thank you again so much for your role in making this possible. And I'm really looking forward to Louis's remarks. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Sean.
Thanks, Michelle, and thanks, Vince. It's a real pleasure to be here. I also will not say very much. For those of you who don't know, the Henry Luce Foundation is a philanthropy based here in New York, and it was created by the generosity of Henry Luce, who founded Time Magazine. And so one of the things that he was obviously very committed to education, to knowledge, but it was not sort of knowledge for its own sake. It was knowledge in the world, which is what made a difference and mattered to Mr. Luce. And so the question, if you think about Time Magazine, Life Magazine, they were about putting the very best thinking, the very best photography on every coffee table in America. It was about knowledge that was alive, that was vibrant. And if it wasn't, then it wasn't really doing its job. So we kind of take that as our North Star at the Luce Foundation and are excited in investing in projects that make knowledge live in communities and for communities, not just for the academy, not just for scholars, not just in academic journals, but in and for the communities that actually own that knowledge, especially in a public institution like City College. So we're thrilled. When this project first came across my desk from Vince, I thought that sounds really cool. And when I got an email from Michelle, 2 weeks ago or something like that, I thought, oh my gosh, this is amazing. The project has gone, despite the pandemic, the project has just thrived and blossomed, and we're so excited. And I'm thrilled to see the website. It's totally gorgeous, and thrilled tonight to hear from Lou. Really excited. Thank you, Michelle, for everything you've done, and thank you, Vince. This is terrific.
Thank you so much, Sean and Vince. So I'll start. I'll start by first telling everyone that we have a little bit of a schedule change. In addition to the conversation with Louis Watts, we will be mining the archive and including at the very end of the program, a slide exhibition that will begin, that Lou will moderate. We understand if you need to leave at that time, that's fine. We'll be recording the whole event and uploading it to our website. We had so much good stuff. We just can't fit it all in. But our full program, our conversation program will be on schedule, on time. Before I introduce Louis Watts, I want to mention a few important guests. I'd like to introduce, I'm not sure if they're here, so I'm just going to do a shout out. There are a lot of people and I can't see everyone and read all the names. I would like to thank and give a shout out to the Deputy Dean of Humanities and Arts, Renata Miller, and she will become our interim dean this summer. We're very grateful to the Dean's office for their funding and support of our program. A big, big thank you to my colleague who is here, who is a visionary. And she was the one that pushed me to spearhead this project, our chairperson of English, Elizabeth Mazzola. Liz never gave up after I did when our proposal was rejected from other funders. Liz and I walked literally down the hill from the campus and had the first conversations about this project with the Schomburg Center archivist Cheryl Barreto and Mary Yearwood. And following that conversation, we met with many others in the Harlem community. I want to give a shout out. I'm not sure if she's here. I hope she is. She said she was coming, to Mary Yearwood. She is the senior but now retired archivist at the New York Public Library Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture. To Herbert Boyd. Herb is a fantastic ally and asset. He's a journalist and prolific author of all things Harlem. And hopefully he's also here. We're indebted to his generosity and his contact list. I would like to thank the faculty from City College and all departments, our department and other departments, who have taught wonderful courses in our program dealing with archives. They're listed in our About section in the website, so you can see their descriptions, you can see the course descriptions, and look at student portfolios. There are two colleagues I would like to thank in particular, Professor William Gibbons, who's been teaching archive courses before we got funding to undergrad and graduate students working with the Schomburg Center, and visiting Professor Nellie Rosario, who's a wonderful novelist who taught 2 archival courses as part of this project, working with our own Langston Hughes archives and the Hurston Wright archives in Washington, D.C. And finally, I want to thank my team. Sydney Valerio is an alum of our MFA program, and she's the project manager of this initiative. And Anna Marjanovic is the wonderful designer who created the website and all things related to the exhibition. We've worked together for almost a year on this, and I'm deeply grateful for their creativity and efforts. So what is this project, and why is it coming out of an MFA program in creative writing? And why is a photographer like Louis Watts, a professor emeritus of art from UC Santa Cruz, launching it? Great questions. Archives' Muse recognizes that contemporary creative writers in all genres are dipping into various histories, collections, archives, both personal and public, to dig for stories. A Harlem storytelling project recognizes that we at City College are linked with our neighborhood, community, and place, whether we're aware of it or not. We work, study, live, commute, and in general, spend a lot of time walking the streets of our neighborhood for lunches, performances, to meet our colleagues and friends. Some of us have long historic relationships with Harlem. Some of us have families who've been here for generations. As a writing program, we celebrate Harlem as the site of the Harlem literary renaissance. And as Harlem becomes gentrified in the last decades, we're aware of the changes. For example, the loss of so many neighborhood churches. This initiative in our MFA program includes a variety of different components. It includes courses taught in our MFA program, speakers, exhibitions, and for the next 3 years, thanks to the Luce Fund grant, we will also be presenting symposia, bringing together archivists, writers, artists, and community activists to discuss their perspective on place and history. This is a project created to encourage, inform, educate, and inspire our students and neighbors to use the archives. Just to be clear, we are not an archive with a material collection of objects, letters, etc. We are a site for conversation and information on these exciting topics. So we're not competing with the archives we highlight. We're welcoming archives and any information on archives, both public and personal, into the conversation. Which now brings me to our featured guest, Louis Watts, whose latest work is exhibited on the site and whose slides you saw in the beginning. He's calling it Mining the Archive. Louis Watts is a photographer, archivist, curator, and professor emeritus of art at UC Santa Cruz. His research and art address cultural landscape in communities of the African diaspora and the archives of African American literature and ephemera. He is the author of Harlem of the West, the San Francisco Fillmore Jazz Era, New Orleans Suite, Music and Culture in Transition, and other books. His work has been exhibited and collected by the Autograph London, the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, the Cité de la Musique in Paris, the Ogden Museum of Southern Art in New Orleans, the Oakland Museum of California, the Berkeley Museum, the Bancroft Library, UC Berkeley, and many more. The Neuberger Museum of Art in Purchase, New York, and the Amistad Center for Art and Culture in Hartford, Connecticut. Louis's life's work has drawn attention to the lives and histories of the African diaspora around the world. And so for this project, which I'll talk about, he traveled to the Amistad Center and photographed these rare books. So Lou, we are gonna, and he's, I should mention, a very, very good friend. So actually I was mentioning to Sean and Vince that two things converged in my life. I got the funding to initiate this out of the MFA program, and I've known Lou for 20 years, maybe more. He happened to be in town, and he told me about this Mining the Archive project that he was working on. So these two elements converge, and I thought it would be perfect for us to launch this website, the project, the initiative, even though we've been working on it for a while and the classes have been running for a while at this moment in time. So Lou, I think our fabulous friends are going to spotlight both of us. And I thought I would start with asking you a question. I'm going to be mindful of time because we're also going to take some of your Q&A. We're going to take some questions at the end. So welcome, Louis. And my first question, before we dive into archives, is could you tell us about your long relationship with Harlem?
Yes. So when I was, I think about 7 or 8, we were visiting, this is from my cousin Eileen, who's in, I think it was Aunt May in New York, and we were in Harlem, and I said to my mother, I said, did we ever live here? Because this seems really familiar to me. And my mother answered, not in this lifetime. And I have actually been photographing in Harlem for the last 50 years. It always feels very familiar to me. Partly is because everything that everybody does in New York, we know about in the rest of the country. But also, I have some kind of connection to this place that is really important and very visceral. And it was actually interesting that I found an archive of photographs in San Francisco from a community that arose at the beginning of World War II when people migrated. Another story that's my family story, west to work in the shipyards. And the community became known as the Harlem of the West because it had a entertainment and cultural center. Although it disappeared, it was redeveloped away in the 60s. So I was actually really honored in March of 2020. I was in an exhibit at the Wilmer Jenkins Gallery in New York that was curated by Buford Smith. And there were a number of mostly photographers from New York, and many members of the Kumonge workshop, which just had a show at the Whitney. And I was really honored that most of them seemed to know who I was because I've been involved in a number of projects with the sort of photographic community, both in New York and the rest of the country. And that was really meaningful to me because that both this place and the sort of work about this place has been really important to my work. And of course, Harlem, like Chicago, like San Francisco, like South Central Los Angeles, is the result of this migration that has informed a lot of the work that I've done. And I'm sitting in Harlem right now, and I'm very happy to be here. And I'm glad I didn't have to come last month, so I'm happy to be here now.
We didn't have to twist your arm to come to Harlem. You didn't have to come to Harlem. I was surprised, and I loved that you did for this show, but the timing worked out. Now, can you speak a little bit, like one of the things we were talking about before this presentation was the fact that there is an interest right now in this moment in time for many reasons, but in particular in recovering from the archives the work of Black photographers, Black artists. There are a couple of amazing shows right now. I just saw this past weekend, the David Hammond show at the Drawing Center. Can you speak a little bit about the interest and revival in particular in the African American community of their work and this moment in time?
Well, I think what's been obvious for a long time is many institutions that are involved in the showing and collecting of creative output by African American artists have not done a very good job of it. And I think because of a variety of things, not the least of which is the events that have led to the Black Lives Matter, there's been a kind of self-examination and also probably more importantly, examination from outside, questioning that fact and questioning and who is making decisions about who is collected, who is shown. And I think that the fact that those voices have expanded is in the process of having a good effect in terms of incredible artists who maybe generations before would have been not known all through their whole lives, and that they were actually coming to the fore. And they serving as an example for young artists coming up. I think the fact that there's sort of more possibilities, I know from some of the artists who I have talked to, that they sort of feel for the first time that if the sky's not the limit, certainly there's more possibilities, and that it encourages them to sort of take their work as far as they can. Oops.
Yeah. Maybe now we can launch into your work in archives, in all aspects of the archives. When did it begin? How did it begin? I know a long time ago when we first met, we were really interested in the facades of buildings in San Francisco. We both lived in San Francisco at the time, in old Black neighborhoods that were no longer, that had been gentrified, and everything had been torn down, but sometimes there was the shadow of a poster or the shadow of a building, and you started documenting those kinds of images. And that was a long time ago. So could you speak a little bit of how that project in particular, but then how it influenced your work up until today?
Well, I have another story about my mother. My father was from Georgia, and she was from Little Rock, Arkansas. And as a matter of fact, my father was discharged from the Army after having been in Europe during World War II. His platoon troop was on its way to Japan, and he was discharged in Fort Lewis in Washington State. And he was on his way back to Atlanta. He had, I think he was in the middle of a master's degree from Atlanta University, and he ambled into Seattle and got a job with the Urban League, and sent for my mother. And I was conceived in Seattle, but my mother actually went back to Little Rock because she knew the doctors. In 1945, she wanted to be with family. And a couple of things. When I was 4 months old, her brother, my Uncle Milton, drove she and me from Little Rock to Seattle. And I never got to ask if they used the Green Book, because I can imagine it was probably not an easy journey. Because I know when we would go south in the 50s to visit the grandparents, we would always camp in Yosemite, partly, I guess, for nature, but also so we didn't have to deal with whether we could find accommodations or not. So anyway, my grandfather was a tailor in Little Rock, and I remember asking her again, do you mean like storefront churches and people kind of talking stuff in the barbershop and improvising in terms of businesses is not just limited to the Central District, the Black section of Seattle? And she said to me, my mother was very wise, it had to come from somewhere. And that kind of awakened my idea about migration, the idea that people, the sort of source of that, and that people had to they brought religious practice. They brought their culture. They brought their musical tastes with them when they came north, west, and east from the South to both escape segregation, but also for economic opportunity. And so when I was actually a history and political science major as an undergrad, and I was in a graduate program in architecture, actually. Actually, I see Tony Cava, who was in that program too. This is interesting. There's people from different parts of my life in this crowd. And I was able to take a photography class, and I had taken some art before for the first time since middle school. Anyway, 2 weeks into that photography class, I said, this is what I want to do. And for about 30 seconds, I said, oh, well, I'm an artist now. All that stuff about culture and history is behind me. But of course, that's what all my work has been about. And the first place I went in that photo class was to West Oakland, because I saw in that landscape evidence of that journey and what people had brought with them. And that is a sort of variations of that have followed my career. Plus, I've gone to the source of some of that, photographed in the South, in New Orleans, and in Arkansas and Georgia, and in the sort of area around the Georgia Sea Islands, which actually I'm going to next week to do some more work for. So I think that idea of narrative as found in the landscape, and also, like I say, and in the faces of the people that inhabited those landscapes, has been really important to me. I've expanded it. I've been able to photograph in Cuba. I've been photographing actually the Black presence in Europe, which has been really interesting and different than when I was there in college, when it was not as diverse. So it's as I say, there's to a lot of my friends, photography allows me to get in situations I probably have no business in, and I really like it. And it's I haven't gotten tired of it yet, and won't.
There's something really interesting, because that's how you started, but somehow this interest has led to different projects that you've worked on.
Yeah.
What have your influences been as you might have changed, subject, like countries? What would you say is the kind of through line with the different projects that led up? And I'm kind of leading up to Mining the Archive.
Okay.
How we got to this moment, this particular exhibition. So amazing. I mean, it knocked me off my feet when I saw the first books, and I saw it. I think right. I think I met you right when you had come back from Connecticut, and it was just beautiful. You took portraits of these incredible first editions of these African American texts. But what was the through line that got you to this moment in the various subjects that you were exploring?
I think the sort of element of time, both in terms of kind of stories, and also the patina. I mean, the thing about the surface of buildings, the fact that it's funny, right around the corner, I see the beginnings of a mural that has all of the heroes of the Harlem Renaissance and of entertainment. And it's sort of half done, there's drawings on the wall. And the one thing I love about Harlem is it always, I just wrote to my friend Daoud Bey about that, Harlem always wears its past and its present on its sleeves. There's examples of Harlem's past and its current condition on the walls, and one thing that's happened with the pandemic is I think a lot more kind of murals, and sort of people have been able to use public space. In Oakland, there's always amazing now murals that have come from the plywood that went up from the windows that were smashed during the demonstration. So they're sort of conscious in terms of mural programs, and then in some cases just things that time has left that's still who's kind of tread there, what's happened over time. And what happened was my friend F. Frank Mitchell, who's also in the audience, who was the former head curator and then head of the Amistad Center for Art and Culture in Hartford, I've done a number of exhibits there. I've done some programs there, and I was sitting in his office, and there was a big stack of books, and I picked the top one up, and it was you'll see it later. There's a picture of there was a book by Frederick Douglass that was published in 1852 called My Bondage and My Freedom, and that book looked like it was that old. It was incredibly beautiful. It was an incredible photograph of him, and Frederick Douglass knew almost from the get-go about, like, very soon after the invention of photography, the power of the image. And he was probably the most photographed human being in the world in the 19th century. Really amazing. And so, I said to Frank, "What is this?" And he said, "Oh, this is our archive, some of which has been in storage, and we have been very interested in having artists to respond to the archive." So I said, "I know what I want to do," and I knew almost immediately that what I wanted to do was reproduce some of those surfaces and the books. The one thing about, especially the books in the 18th century, because there was no television or movies or the internet, the books were not only vehicles of information, but they were these incredibly beautiful objects that obviously were developed to get people's attention. And you can kind of see that. And so there was as objects, I really liked it. And you'll see there were obviously images by poets, writers. Some of them were documentaries, and actually the Amistad also had all this incredible racist material, which I thought was interesting, because probably the only other place it would exist would be in a private white library. And what I got from that was how hard someone has been working, especially at the end of Reconstruction, to kind of foment white supremacy, so that especially working poor would be fooled into thinking they'd be better off thinking someone was below them than sort of coalescing, and it was interesting just the extent that people would go to kind of push that forward.
We are going to see some of these images when we start the slideshow. They are amazing. They're troubling. Maybe one last question from me, and then I'm gonna, if you have questions for Lou, please put them in the chat, and Sydney will pick them out. How did you make, how did you come to that decision to photograph that work that's really clearly racist and offensive, in this moment in time, and how do you feel you can represent it as a body of work? Can you talk, because we've had some discussions on this, and I think it's fascinating, and it's such an important discussion.
Mm-hmm. Well, I was really interested where it was found, and that it would be in this archive. That people were obviously collecting that information for different reasons, and I think it was real obvious that people that were collecting it, that would give it to the Amistad, were doing it for very different reasons than probably the people who wrote the books, and that other people that collected it. And it was really interesting. Sometimes I'll kind of go to a place or sort of work on something, and kind of how it ends up being presented will develop over time. As soon as I saw all of this material, I knew that I wanted to scan it and capture it. I mean, I was using the scanner as a camera, and I've already exhibited by printing really large prints on canvas and handmade paper to sort of match the materials of the book covers and also the pages. And the idea was to kind of reconfigure it, maybe hold up a light to it, let scale really allow more people to access it, because some of them were very fragile and could not be seen. And it's also led me to then look in other spaces. I've been at Tulane and a couple places in New Orleans. I'm down the street from the Schomburg, although I'm waiting for them to open. There's the African American Library in Oakland has been really generous and opened up many of the things that are in their stacks that are not accessible to the public. And so I've been sort of continuing to grow this work. And it's, for instance, I think I have an example of it. Someone gave me a copy of Uncle Tom's Cabin that was published in 1901, which was, really interesting. And I know at the Schomburg they have like Italian translations of Zora Neale Hurston and a number and of Sweet Fly Paper of Life. So I'm sort of interested both in their kind of life, and also the idea that these expressions of kind of history and culture have kind of lives that are certainly beyond what happens in this country. And I think the same thing, it was really funny. I didn't hesitate to scan any of the racist material. But for a while, I was thinking, am I going to do it? But I think the dialogue that it presents has been really interesting, and I think it sort of both makes the materials from sort of different camps resonate and have a kind of dialogue. So that's been good.
Yeah, I mean, we of course, I mentioned before, we have these wonderful, this wonderful faculty, Nellie Rosario in particular, and William Gibbons have worked directly with the 3 archives that I mentioned, and their students have produced incredible work. So for the creative writer, engaging with that work that's found in public and in private collections that now we're having access to, has been really exciting for just taking their thinking to another level, right? And maybe this last, because I think I'm waiting for questions. So now is your time. Please, we're open for questions to Lou, and I think the best way to do it is to put it in the chat or raise your hand. But maybe while we're waiting for the next question, I'll just ask, because you have so many great stories, Lou. When you were putting together this Mining the Archive in particular, what do you feel? What was the shift for you? What did you realize as you were recovering some of these images? One of the when we had a little show to just the team when we were putting together the website, and we have a limited amount of slides. And they're so beautiful that one of the things we worried about was, image capturing, stealing the slides, stealing the images. I mean, I know that's done, but this isn't for. I mean, how do you feel as a photographer that work being taken out of context, stolen, or whatever? Appropriated. And not stolen isn't the word. Appropriated.
Well, it's interesting. I've had this conversation with the language about photography, like taking a photograph, shooting, all it's sort of interesting that I think is part of it. But on some level, it's both. It becomes public property. I mean, if it's out in the world. It's funny. I keep I was always asked in class. So when you make a work, what would happen if it fell out of your backpack and kind of fell on the ground? What would you want sort of people to get from it without you there to explain it? That idea, because that also then you have to think about how you do explain it when you can. And I think that the sort of idea of objects that are the product of this thing that I did to sort of capture them, I guess, is just another step. I mean, it's kind of part of a process, and I think that's why I like the title "Mining the Archive," because it's about the process from seeing it and being surprised to thinking about what I wanted to do with it, to carrying it out, to showing it, and then it taking other lives. It also exists as slides on the computer, and I think all of those are both things I have control of, but not completely. And so it's interesting that in many ways I'm a vehicle for this. I'm driving the vehicle, but sometimes it has its own life. And I think that's kind of the way I think about it. The other thing I was going to say, what I really like about this particular circumstance is I've always been a big supporter of multidisciplinary kind of education. Because and I like the idea of the interface between kind of my take on literature, and then the object of literature, and then people who are practitioners, and kind of the dialogue that we can have together, the dialogue you and I have together. So that's real. I'm really excited about that, and I think we both certainly have a lot to give, and everybody has things to give to the table. If that makes sense.
Great. So I see some great questions. I'm going to actually let Sydney now ask them.
Okay.
Thank you. The first question comes from Isabella, and she wants to know, what was the first creative contest you entered? What was the theme, and did you win?
Oh, God, I'm trying to think. I know, well, when you apply for grants, when you apply for graduate school, not to mention, or I can't remember, because I think it's like, on the one hand, that idea of competition is not, at least I'd like to think it's not something that interests me completely. On the other hand, I know, either because of my peers, many of whom are very supportive, that sometimes if someone I respect says, no, you weren't on your game, I will, it'll push me to go farther. So I don't know if I can't remember, maybe because I don't want to, but I've been very fortunate that people have responded to the work. And I sort of feel, as a result of that, it has been really important, even though I'm not teaching, I haven't taught for 7 years, to be very supportive of my fellow artists, and especially younger artists who are ready for next steps, that whatever I can do to help them. I write a lot of letters of recommendation. I try to be encouraging, but at the same time, I try to have a dialogue about both, what we think about each other's work, because that becomes really important. That was always important when I was teaching. As much as I would get as much as I would give from my students.
Thank you, Lou. The next question, and I think we only have time for these next 3 that are in the chat. The next question comes from Anthony.
Oh,
He
yes.
wants to know how Lou goes about establishing the rapport required to do work of a personal and political nature. How has that work and the efforts required changed as your career has progressed?
It's interesting. That's the first thing students ask, like about shooting in public, like, how do you do it? What if someone says no? And on the one hand, I'd like to say, I got that covered, and I don't. It's always a process. But the one thing that's very interesting is if I may not even know exactly what I'm doing, but if I kind of am into it, the percentage of people that will say no if I ask to photograph goes way down. And there'll be other times when I think, like I photographed a lot in West Oakland, and there have been times when I kind of said, oh, I'll just go do that. And I didn't really know why I was there. And people will pick up on that, and it'll be they will be much more rejection. And so it's interesting. I have a kind of radar that'll tell me if I'm really on my game or not. I would say that the sort of probably the hardest thing about asking someone to photograph is the fact that they may say no. And if you can realize that's part of the process, someone has a right to say no and can move on, and that you have to sort of come to terms with that. That makes things a lot easier. And the other thing is, this whole idea of whether you're stealing someone's soul, or the idea of shooting or taking a picture. If you don't feel that you're doing that, I think you're already halfway there, because I think if your motives are pure, that you're trying to render the world, you're trying to show people how they live, or as they live, or where they live, I think that becomes much more important. And I think that happens from time. You learn that from experience.
Thank you, Lou. Isabella and Ben and some others are saying thank you. Marnie, you were the photography professor at Berkeley, so they're saying thank you. Isabella, just to let you know, the website, Anna has dropped it in the chat. If you want to contact Lou, please reach us via the website and we can share that information with you. The next question is, Lou, you described mining rather than curating or creating. Would you say you're discovering what's already there, or helping to foster new ways of looking, or something else? And this comes from Liz Mazzola.
Okay. I would say the idea for this particular work is that I'm actually looking in established archives. And I am, if the mining is the right verb, I am kind of searching for it. I'm digging for it. We're going to work this metaphor to death. And then sort of processing it. And so I think Frank may have thought that from the Amistad, but it just seemed like it fit perfectly, because I was really interested in kind of having both the product and the name of the product reflect this idea of process, because I think that's always really important to me.
Thank you, Lou. The next question comes from Ben. He's curious about your strategies for making a book, mining an archive, in relation to making photographs out in the world.
It's actually really interesting about the idea of even thinking about the work going to be in a book, because I think you think about it in different ways. You think about ordering it in different ways, and in some cases, that's been important. Even if I'm not going to do a book or not, to kind of lay things out as if it's going to be a book, because it makes me think about the body of work and how it's flowing. And I think it's related to, but maybe different than thinking about if you're going to exhibit it. But I think. And I don't know if I can say exactly what that is, but especially, well, there's some books that are like a strong narrative, beginning, middle, and end. I think we photographers don't always have to, we're not tied to that. But I think there is a certain, even if you're kind of making it up, there is a flow to how you want people to process a body of work. Like what do you get from it if you see it in a particular order? Like if you get from A to B or A to X, or maybe it won't be that chronological. And I think that for me at the beginning at some point of the process, it helps me to think about the work in general and in specifics. And so I really love books. And I love having a variety of, and I like, there's times I like websites, although my website's about 8 years out of date. I have to pick it up. In fact, there are people on this team that are going to help me to fix that. It's interesting that there's always things to keep track of. There's new work to make. There is, editing the work, preparing it for exhibits, and, laying out books. And then websites, which is a whole nother thing. We have a whole bunch of ways and a whole bunch of things to mine. And the website for me has always been at the top of my list to get to, and I haven't yet. And I am going to do that pretty quickly.
Well, Lou, thank you so much. This is a final question. Okay. Michelle, you wanted to say something?
Yes, I'm so sorry. Maybe we can take 2 questions, because I would really like to ask if you can, send me Tony Cava's question about interdisciplinary, because I want to throw something in, a personal story about Lou and I and our friendship over a span of years.
Okay. Yeah. So the question that Bayette posed earlier was, Bayette Lewis, I am curious about your thoughts on new modes of presentation for narratives and archives that leverage new media and new technology, as well as social media, virtual reality, and augmented reality.
Well, I was going to say the sort of the dreaded digital. It's funny. I was at a conference of photographers my age in the 90s, and we were all scared to death because of this looming digital. But it was interesting when I taught. All these 18 to 22-year-olds were really interested in the darkroom and also in digital. They wanted their hands on everything, and in some ways they were much more healthy about it than I am even now. But I think what's interesting is the walls between film, music, multimedia are breaking down, and categories or hats that you were forced to wear are no longer in play. And so I think we have a variety and a lot of means to tell stories, invent stories, do things kind of on a symphonic level, and I think it's really exciting as far as I'm concerned, because it just means the idea. I mean, I think we're all trying to tell stories, if we're writing or if we're doing it, and the fact that we have a lot of means at our disposal is exciting and sort of broadens the conversation and the amount of, and information that gets out into the world that people can share. So I'm all for it. Bayette, who's writing that, is someone who's a real prime practitioner of that, because I think he was trained as a photojournalist, and he's now working it in a whole bunch of different ways. And I'm really proud of him, and I'm going to be talking to him. I'll be calling you Bayette.
Thank you, Lou and Bayette. Michelle, you can wrap up with your insights about Anthony's questions. Okay. And just to let everyone in the audience know, we will have Lou answer the other questions in the chat and post them in our website soon. So please make sure to visit our website.
Right, send me email. I think they're going to give you they're going to put my business out in the street. So please, I'm happy to write. I'm sitting here in New York. Well, maybe I'm gonna have to leave New York, but I'm on the road for the next couple of weeks. So I'd be happy. I'll try to get to you when I can. And I'm really interested in. I mean, the reason. Well, there's a couple of reasons. I love doing these presentations because it forces you to put your ducks in a row. I see Kathy Sloan's in this audience, and she's heard that before. But it really is important, and it's important for my process because if you have to, and I think it was important to students, if you have to articulate about work, you have to really figure out what you're doing, and I think that's really important. Okay.
I am going to do something that's impossible now, which is going to. I've read questions, but I think that maybe this is a moment you can answer. We can address all three. One is a question from Tony Cava. Can Lewis expand on this notion of interdisciplinary collaboration? Okay. And then Benjamin Sweat is an amazing photographer in our program. So one of the things I want to tell everyone is that the reason I'm so excited about this project and having Lou launch it is that we have so many talented, multi-talented artists who come to our MFA program.
Oh yeah, no, I believe it.
And when we do interdisciplinary work and offer them an opportunity to link different mediums, the results are incredible. So Benjamin asks, in your archiving work, do you write about the materials as well as photographing them? And then Nellie Rosario asks, thanks you for this insightful discussions. And she says, one of the things that they discuss in the class, archival storytelling, is that of taking into account various effective archival roles of archivist, subject, user, creator, community. As a minor, how do you negotiate these multiple positions? So I don't know if you can even remember all three questions, but basically about the multiple natures of interdisciplinary approach and the multiple roles. And then I'm going to end with a tiny story about our friendship over many, many years.
So this relates to the response to Bayete's question. The idea that we have so many more means at our disposal, both means these categories. I'm a visual artist, I'm a painter, I'm a filmmaker, I'm a poet. They're blurring a lot, and I think that's actually a really good thing. And I think it's a really good thing in academia that the one thing was interesting when I was teaching at Berkeley, they did not have photography. Photography was not in the art department, so I was teaching a lot of architecture students who were dying to do another creative class, and it was great. And some of them ended up becoming photographers or picture editors. And I was occasionally, I would get English majors and other people who were not able officially to sign up for the class, but could sometimes talk their way into the class. And so I was actually able to teach a wide variety of people, and I think that's kind of where my idea of interdisciplinary came from. And I love those people were able to use some of those strategies in their disciplines. Even if they were not taking more pictures, they could think about the world and kind of their way of moving through the space. Okay, and what was the...
Well, maybe I'll just sort of wrap up, Lou, and you can throw something in, because we're going to have our post program coming up, or Mining the Archives program coming up, where you're going to go through this.
You can actually see this work we've been talking about, which I think is a good idea.
You can actually see the work. So I have known Lou since the 90s. I'm not good at math, so I won't even try to imagine how long that's been. But one of the most important things, and when I met him at the time, as some of my students who are here know, I was a filmmaker, film producer for many years. I produced 3 films, and I was living in San Francisco working on a Brazilian feature film. And Lou and I met in a writing workshop with our good friend, the late photographer, writer, Jean McMahon. And it was for her, friends and colleagues and strangers. I didn't know Jean before I joined that workshop. And what really impressed me, Lou came, it was a 3-hour workshop, we did the work, but all the rest of us were writing a lot in the free write time. And then we'd read our work and we'd get to Lou, and he would have written 1 sentence.
Probably lucky, right?
But it was beautiful. Mm-hmm. It was beautiful. And I really came to appreciate how whoever we are in the world, whatever our strength is, we
have an ability to communicate. And the gift is the gift is coming from our strengths. So if we identify as a visual person, if we identify as a literary person, if we identify as an imagistic person or a word person, it sort of comes together. And then the last story I want to share is that we have been talking about art and images and writing over the course of our many, many years of friendship. And you introduced me to a person who became a great mentor, and I was able to work with him on an essay. Raghuveer Singh, the late Raghuveer Singh, wonderful photographer. And I think Zeddy's in the crowd. There's a our worlds sort of intersect with curators and artists, writers. And for me, that is so important for a creative writer. I mean, we're an MFA program and we're doing this interdisciplinary project. And sometimes people say, why? And I say, well, because what could be more important to the writer? Community, Harlem, the place that you're in, intersecting with different voices, librarians, archivists, community people, of course, your academic community that you're in, we're definitely in a program in an English department. But as creative writers, our world is vast. Would you agree?
No, it's true. The one thing I'll say about Jean's class was, I wrote, but I didn't feel comfortable writing it. And I think what was really great, it wasn't completely for artists, but because she knew me and was both a visual artist and writer, it was like anything else. You use a muscle, you get better at it. And so I think by the end of the workshop, I was writing longer than a sentence, but it just gave me the confidence that when I switched to a tenure track position at Santa Cruz, I was able to kind of dot the I's and cross the T's, which was necessary. And also that helped in terms of communicating with my students and with my colleagues. It was great. And I know that it basically, I had to do it, but I think it opened up an atmosphere again that I tried to replicate when I was in the classroom. So that's my.
So much, Lou. Thank you. So thank you, everyone. If you have to leave now, please feel comfortable and free. Thank you so much for joining us. We're thrilled. We have a whole bunch of people, and nothing makes me happier than having a wonderful audience. So now we will start the slide presentation, the slides in our exhibition. And Sydney will run it, and you will hear Lou's voice telling the story of each slide. And it'll go, we're not going to interrupt, and we're not going to take questions, and it'll go pretty, I think it'll be about 20, 25 minutes. Okay. So thank you, everyone. And Sydney?
Don't go if you don't have to.
Oh yeah, please don't go. Please hang on. What's 20 minutes on a Friday night?
Right. I was going to say, this is a photograph that first photograph was taken by Renee Cox, I think during one of the Black Portraits conferences at Harvard. And I really loved it. And Anna sort of combined this idea of the archive on it, and I think I really like it a lot. So thank you, Anna. So I will just show you this. Oh,
Lou, can I just interrupt? If anybody, I made postcards. I loved Anna's poster so much. If anybody would like a postcard, just go to our website, make a request, and I will send it to you. I'll send you 5. So they're so beautiful. They're just a work of art. Thank you.
So I talked about Frederick Douglass. I opened this book and I almost fell over. It was so beautiful and kind of I could feel the energy from it. And so and it was that book and I knew exactly what I wanted to do. So that was great. And like I said, he was photographed a lot, and he was photographed before it was possible to reproduce photographs. So some of these are etchings and other ways to reproduce. And he was a good-looking dude, so that didn't hurt. He sort of used his skills for abolition as an abolitionist tool. Okay. So it was interesting, that again the books were in different shapes. A lot of these books would have, sort of covering to protect the images because the ink was probably unstable. And so I loved playing around with what I decided to obscure when I was doing the pages. And some people have been really upset. I was very gentle with the books, as I hope Frank will back me up on this. Okay. This is actually from a book about John Henry. It was a series of stories. And what I thought was really beautiful was it was illustrated by these wood blocks all the way through the book. There was a picture of Stagger Lee and John Henry and other people. And it sort of played around a little bit with the edge of stereotype, but it was beautiful, and it really sort of visualized these stories that we all heard growing up. So I was really interested in kind of reproducing that. Next. And then Paul Laurence Dunbar in this really beautiful book. And I like the idea that the kind of covering, which is, you can see has these bubbles, kind of also reflects in the patina something about its age. But I think it's a beautiful illustration of what the content of the book is. Yeah. Next. And it was interesting to play around with different ways to render the book. So I actually put these books on the scanner and then put some black cloth over it. Because on the one level, I mean, I could have photographed it, and I have, and in fact, but I like that idea of the fact that the surfaces were sort of flattened out a little bit, and this kind of showed some of the variety of images in this collection. And these just beautiful, like gold leaf. This is one of the examples of Uncle Tom's Cabin. Crisis, which was the publication of the NAACP that W.E. Du Bois did, and he usually hired artists to do these covers. A friend of mine looked up Frank Waltz, and he was actually a white Midwestern artist who came to New York and did a lot of work for left-wing and progressive causes and publications. And I think in some level that reflects the time. This was a board game they had of Little Black Sambo. And you know, it's so beautiful that I remember when my parents had it, and we talked about how on the one hand this is like a myth and has African in origin, and the other hand it seemed like the illustration was kind of again teetering on whether it was stereotype. But on the other hand, this is just a beautiful. I have a copy of this up in my darkroom or in my studio. Next. So Mary Ellen Pleasance was a woman who came to San Francisco during the gold rush from New Orleans, and she, for a variety of means, actually amassed a fortune, and had actually a house on, I think it was Scott, in San Francisco, that was one of the few remaining sort of large buildings that survived the 1901 earthquake and fire. And there's a sort of plantation in Sonoma County called Beltrain that looks exactly like the small plantations on the River Road in New Orleans, outside of New Orleans, and she built that. But she was known as Mammy Pleasance. She did not play that at all. So it was interesting that here's someone who'd written a book using that derogatory term. And I was interested in that kind of contrast between the name and kind of the grace and dignity that she showed in the picture. Next. So this is my friend Pablo Delano, who teaches at Trinity College in Hartford. And he's the son of one of the well-known FSA photographers during the Depression. And he suggested we have an exhibit, because he's been collecting information from colonial Puerto Rico. So we had an exhibit at Trinity that kind of was really a dialogue between this archive mining that we've both been doing, and I think it really was successful. And he's actually expanded this work and shown it a lot of other places, and I have too, and maybe we'll do it again. But I wanted to show you a kind of sense of the scale of the images. Okay, next. So I decided when I was kind of putting this together is that this idea of photography is collecting, whether using a camera. And when I was actually gathering information for my book about the Fillmore, I was in a record shop and a friend said, you want to take a picture of Billie Holiday's passport? And I said, yes. So I did, and I think it was in the midst of the fact that I had been noticing that all the pictures I had seen of Billie Holiday, she looked completely different. So I have been probably for the last 10 years collecting images, some of which are copywritten, and I've actually shown them a couple, not in sort of certain circumstances, and I may do that again. I've gotten permission from some of the photographers, but let's look at some of those, because I think I was just interested in the fact that she was in the public eye. She had a sort of very difficult life, but also was very successful. I mean, she was real. You can sort of see some of the contrast. Next, and I know that the gardenias she used because she was having her hair straightened and burned it, and so someone suggested putting a gardenia, and that became her trademark. Next. And here she is, actually, I think in San Francisco when she was arrested on drug charges. There's a movie about the U.S. versus Billie Holiday, because they really targeted her, partly because she was so successful and because she insisted on continuing to sing Strange Fruit about lynching. And so they really targeted her, and she was arrested many times. And she had a heroin addict. Next. On Fillmore Street, there's fellows that hung out in front of the Burger King, and I was asking them about them. They said that she was so beautiful that it wouldn't matter what kind of condition she was in. She would walk across by the street, and everybody's mouth would drop open, and she's a real incredibly beautiful person. Next. So here's a variety of ways that I've thought about the same thing, idea of emphasizing that comparison and difference by presenting her in different kind of motifs and together. Next. And here's a few from Harlem. The Harlem Renaissance has always been on my mind, and this is actually a theater that is no longer existent, but I know people have told me that they would go to this theater and see a live show and a movie for less than 50 cents. And so I saw this as a kind of metaphor for the ghost and what's left over of the Harlem Renaissance. I think I took this picture about 20 years ago. Next. And I took this picture probably on a Sunday morning, probably in the mid 80s. Reminded me of my grandparents. It's a kind of recurring story, and certainly on Sunday in Harlem, you see this a lot. And I loved, being a West Coast with West Coast eyes, I just love the age of the buildings, anything east of the Mississippi, especially on the East Coast. Next. So Howard Hughes. Langston Hughes is much more interesting to me than Howard Hughes. Langston Hughes was actually a hero of mine, and I remember him writing about sitting on the stoop of his brownstone and kind of watching Harlem. And I haven't yet, but every time I come to Harlem, I always kind of go to his, on a Langston Hughes way on 126th, I think it is. And a couple of times I've gotten in, but I thought this reflected this idea that he talked about. This is Hughes' house now. Next. And one day, somebody was walking out, and I asked if I could come in. This is also about 10 or 15 years ago, and got to photograph inside the space, which was really thrilling and kind of expanded the story. Next. And this is his writing space, and this is actually kind of a pasted up tear sheet from, I think from Sweet Flypaper of Life, the book that he collaborated with Roy de Carava with, which is actually a really important book to me and to a lot of photographers I know. Next. And then I did a residency. I can't remember when I did this. This is probably, maybe in about 2014 or 15. and I saw some guys on a stoop dressed as Black Panthers, and these kids were interviewing them, and I asked if I could photograph, and I had the camera up to my eye, and they parted, and this woman and her daughter walked up the stairs to their apartment. And I call this convergence in Harlem. It was actually, I thought I was so mesmerized, I almost didn't take the picture because it was sort of unfolding through the viewfinder. You know, is that real or not? They're the new Black Panther Party, so I thought that was an interesting indication and reflection of how Harlem has changed. I remember walking 125th Street in the 60s, and some of the brothers were talking bad about me because I had light skin, and now I've seen young women sunbathing in Garvey Park, and so things certainly have changed. Although, and I know some people from Harlem I'm going to have a talk with, because I've said Harlem is still, it's changing, but it's not like it's disappeared. But it's been interesting just walking around the last couple of days how it is still an African village. It's been expanded, and it's complicated, obviously. And obviously a lot of people have been displaced. So it's like a lot of other places, it's a complicated story, just like the story of the Fillmore District in San Francisco. Next. This was actually at the end of, this is in 2007 when I did a residency here for a couple of months, and the African American Parade, and in 2007, everybody was saying, oh, Harlem's done. The African American Parade is like from 110th up to 142nd, and there were people 5 deep along the whole parade route. And this is at the end, and this reminded me of a picture that Roy DeCarava did of a woman in a young woman in a confirmation dress. The other thing I didn't notice till I printed is that the light reflecting off the windows going down that street are stars. So sometimes you are given gifts that you don't know about till later. Next, this may be the last one. And then someone had said, well, have you seen the Elizabeth Catlett sculpture? And this is on Riverside Drive, right next to where Ralph Ellison's house was. And I thought, what an incredible placement and a sort of reflection of the things that he talked about, and also reflection of sort of certain reality in this place that he wrote about and lived in. And I think that's it. Let's see if there's one. Yeah. So that's just a sort of a quick sort of a peek into some of the things I'm interested in, and you can sort of see something about my process. And maybe I'm trying to get Michelle to let me do a longer, show more work in the future. So
of course, I will.
Okay. So I don't know if anybody has any questions about this work. I'm happy to answer those, and while we have time.
We have about 8 minutes.
Okay.
We're going to shut down the program. So yeah, amazing slideshow. Amazing slideshow.
Hey, Lou.
Yes.
Where are your pictures from New Orleans?
They're in my book. I'm gonna have some people from New Orleans are gonna be talking bad about me. We only had a limited time, and New Orleans is actually a really important place to me. It was interesting growing up in Seattle. There were a lot of Louisiana transplants, and in fact, what happened during the beginning of World War II, in some cases, whole villages of Louisiana and Texas came west, and so when I went, it sort of exceeded my expectations. But there were also things that were very familiar because of what people had brought with them, and so I had a chance to be there. I was supposed to be there when Hurricane Katrina hit, and I was able to get there about 6 weeks afterwards. And so the book I did, New Orleans Suites, with my colleague Eric Porter, is kind of about the cultural practice that existed before and the efforts by the cultural workers to make sure they would not be wiped out, because a lot of the housing, even that was livable, was boarded up and torn down because certain powers that be did not want many of the Black people to return. So it was really important to maintain the Mardi Gras Indian tradition, the funeral tradition, the second line tradition, and it has existed, and people are still fighting for their rights.
By the way, Lou, this is Eric Waters.
Of course it is, yes. I knew Eric was not going to let me get away with that. Eric, actually, I met Eric because Deborah Willis had a show right after Katrina of photographers from all over the country. And I remember Eric and other people were saying, we're not real happy with some of these artists that came to New Orleans, did a book and left. But then he said to me, but I like your work and you need to come to the first Mardi Gras coming in February. And he did, and he's sort of given me access to things I would never had. And he's like we're very tight. We're ever into your debt, Eric.
Lou, tell everybody how they can purchase your books and where. And
that's a good question. The Heyday Books in Berkeley, and we'll try to put I'll send that. Heyday Books has the latest version of Harlem of the West, and you can order that. I'm sure it's on Amazon. It's funny that it's had 3 iterations, but the great thing about having established publishers, I no longer have to schlep books to bookstores. So just remember Heyday Books and also Harlem of the West. The book New Orleans Suite was published by is available. It's published by UC Press. And my book of portraits, it was self-published. It was done by Heyday Books. And at this point, there's only a few copies left. If you write me and you're really nice, you might be able to get a copy. And I think MOAD, the Museum of African Diaspora, has a few left in their bookstore. They did last week. So you might try that, but I don't think that book is not on the sort of conventional, like Amazon and other orders. But that book will probably, I'm working on an extension of that book or a different version.
Great, Lou. Thank you so much. This was just a beautiful conversation. We're very happy. The light on you is beautiful, and I'm glad we're recording this. So it's a perfect ending. You have the sun in Harlem.
I just want to say again, I'm so sort of honored that people like Lana Turner, who's an incredible, important person in Harlem and who I consider, who's my friend, who's always been very generous to me. And some of my friends in the photographic community in the Bay Area and New York are tuned in, dear friends, and some people I haven't talked to in a while. I'm just really happy to see you're there and that you can kind of see what I've been doing. And so I won't have to explain myself when I see you. So thank you all. And thank you, New York. As I said, I always feel at home and comfortable here. It was a little weird in the middle of the pandemic to be here last March, and it was a little weird on Thursday when I first got here, just because everything was different. But as soon as I walked around Harlem, everything was good, and I felt much better. So thank you again, everybody.
when we bring you back, Lou, I hope that we can actually have an in-person
Okay, that would be great.
showing and viewing, and everyone will join us, and we'll have a party after.
And you can all see how amazing my friend Michelle is. She's like a really amazing person. So I'm really happy to both support and be in what are we in? We have a relationship. We have a something.
Yeah.
Yes. No, I mean, and I to support this program, which I think is just beginning. I mean, I'm really honored.
And this initiative. And please visit our website if you haven't. And thank you once again for joining us, and have a great evening.
Okay.